Today we're looking at two-part counterpoint. What is counterpoint? Well, the art of combining different melody lines, two or more, in a musical composition. The texture is referred to as contrapuntal texture, and resulting texture is often referred to as polyphonic texture as well. A bit more about contrapuntal texture. This term implies an equalizing of the voices as opposed to homophonic texture, where there is a clear melody and accompaniment. So go on YouTube and look at a score and listen to the music of a Chopin waltz. Immediately after, look at a score and listen to the music of a Bach two-part invention. The difference in texture is audible. The difference is visual when you look at the music. When you go to the piano and play a few lines of each example, the difference in texture is felt physically also. So there are a few things to understand before going forward. Though contrapuntal texture is the combining of horizontal melodies, the vertical sound combinations imply or clearly state chords and chord progressions. The chord progressions used in four-part harmony are very much a part of two-part counterpoint. All tendency tones, like leading tones and sevenths, must be resolved. Any rules about parallels, harmonic rhythm, phrase length, phrases ending with a cadence, every one of these things continues to be in play during counterpoint. Let's take a standard progression in four parts and dissect it to understand two parts. So I have drawn here the passing 6/4 progression in the key of C major. It's in four voices. When we move this to two voices, in the second bar, you discover that if we take the bottom and the top, we have contrary motion of tonic, supertonic, and mediant. In the second bar, you can see that the bass stayed the same, and the alto has now been just a held whole note. It could have been repeated. And the final option is to take what was originally in the tenor and put it up in the soprano for an 8/7/8. Notice that when we move from four-part harmony to two-part counterpoint, our stem rule returns to default stem rules learned in rudiments. So now let's analyze this further. In four parts, the passing 6/4 was clearly 1, 5/6/4, and 1 in first inversion, 1/6. When we look at the two parts, there are times that more than one option of analysis is a consideration. If we look at the first bar, we have 1, 7 diminished 6, 1/6 implied, or 1 and a passing tone in both the soprano and the bass, followed by a 1/6. Notice that over top of my two parts, I have put intervals. Now these intervals are numbered from 2 to 8. Compound intervals are automatically made into their smaller versions. This allows us to analyze our perfect intervals, whether we've got parallels, and whether we've got some dissonances that are unexpected. In the second bar, you can see that it could be labeled 1, 5/6/4, 1/6, but it is probably going to be heard and understood as 1 passing tone, 1/6. And the final bar, because the leading tone is in the soprano and is resolving, we automatically hear it as 1, 7 diminished 6, 1/6. When we look at our interval numbers, our first bar has 2 consonant intervals and 1 perfect. Our second bar has 2 perfect intervals and 1 consonant. and then our third bar has one consonant and two perfects. We're going to discuss this element in the next slide. We need to be very interval aware. When we look at our intervals, we need to know that consonant intervals are used often. These are the thirds and sixths. Perfect intervals are also used, the fifth and the octave. While a unison is possible, it is not probable. Dissonant intervals are generally not sounded together, the second and the seventh. That doesn't mean that they are not in the composition. It just means that they are tending to be part of oblique motion. And that means we have left the fourth. Well, it's generally avoided in counterpoint unless it's part of a cadential 6/4 at a significant cadence. So we put the intervals above our system to realize our goals, to have more consonant intervals than perfect intervals, to mostly reserve the 5 going to the 8 for cadence points, and to make downbeats in the body of the phrase mostly consonant rather than perfect. And yes, there is one last interval. That's the tritone, the augmented fourth or diminished fifth. The tritone is used fairly often in counterpoint because it is comprised of tendency tones within the dominant seventh and diminished chords. As such, it helps to define the key that you're in. The tritone must resolve by step in contrary motion immediately. When we are labeling our intervals above the staff, put a capital T for a tritone and a 4 for a perfect fourth. So let's look at an example. I've chosen phrase 4 of a hook minuetto that has been very popular for years. It's in the key of C major, everybody's favorite sight reading key. So when we analyze our intervals, we notice that the opening bar has 3 threes in a row and gets us going on lots of consonant intervals. Now, one caution at this point is to say we cannot have a phrase that is completely threes and completely sixes. First of all, that's not independent melodies. That is parallel motion, and counterpoint is not full of parallel motion. So going beyond 3, possibly 4 of an interval in a row with 4 going to something else is not common. In here in bar 2, you can see that we have a 6 on count 1 and that I put a capital T on count 2 because there's a B to an F, the diminished fifth. It does resolve immediately by step in opposite direction to E and C, which is the 1 chord. In bar 3, we start with a 6 on count 1, and then we have a delightful little triplet because this is the final cadence. I put the 7 in brackets. The reason it's in brackets is it's a passing tone, but I don't put a P up there because it's amazing how many times people will pop something like a P up there and not realize they just did an 8 to an 8. So if we put a number up there to be interval aware, but put it in brackets so that we know that it is an unessential note, that is awesome. We also notice that the 7 did happen. It's a dissonant interval, but the F to the D is the 6th, and that's the sounded interval. There is oblique motion for the rest of that count, which means this 7th doesn't sound as dissonant in this format. When we go to count 2, we do have a 4, and it is part of an implied cadential 6/4. Now, the leading tone does resolve to the tonic over the bar line, and we have an 8 for our final count 1. Notice that where we have a collection of fairly close perfect intervals, it is a main cadence. Now, when we look at our Roman numbers, our functional chord symbols, we see 1, and then we see 5 in first inversion. Many people say, can I label that a 7 because it looks like a 7 diminished? You can, but the reality is we don't hear it as a diminished triad because the fifth isn't there. As such, this functions as the 5 in first inversion, and it's the preferred analysis. When we get to bar 2, count 1 is the 4 in first inversion. Now count 2 is the B to the F. Again, yes, you can put 7 diminished in root position. This time it is much more acceptable because we actually have both the B and the F there that make the diminished sound. Having said that, many people will write down that this is the dominant 7th in 6/5 inversion because it is sounding to the ears like that, and that if we had more notes, we would have had the root note in there. And of course, 7 diminished and 5/6/5 always resolve to 1. And then at the beginning of measure 3, we have a 2 in first inversion. And then you can see my numeration for the cadential 6/4. In counterpoint, it is certainly fine to have a dominant, a Roman number 5 followed by the 4-3. I tend to encourage people to put in the full cadential 6/4 so that they are aware of why that 4 is in place and why it is completely legal. And now for an example by J.C. Bach. This is an aria in F, and again, I've chosen the last section of this piece so that you can see what main cadences look like. And so here we've got a pickup, and we notice that the bass actually has a rest on count 1. Now, the great composers found that that was a great way of having a fifth on count 1 without having the fifths. And now we come to a compound time example, one that is anonymous. We don't know who wrote it. And not only is it in compound time, it's in 12/8 time. And we can see that when one voice has activity, the other voice is simple and that it switches. So initially, the treble melody is active while the bass And now I have a suggestion. Ahead of going to that first lesson in Counterpoint, take out your grades 1, 2, and 3 conservatory books. You know you have them close by. Open to the Baroque dance examples. Those are your list A pieces early in the book. Though these often have a sense of homophonic texture, the two-voice early dances are fine examples of what to do in two-part writing. Your ultimate goal is a phrase or two of music that is similar in texture and difficulty to a grade 1 or 2 Baroque dance. Within the Royal Conservatory's exam system, Theory 9, your responsibility is to write a single line of treble clef writing against a given bass line. It will be 4 bars long, and it will be a clear, authentic cadence at the end. For Theory 10, it's a little bit more complicated. The goal is to write a single phrase, but you're writing both the treble clef and the bass clef in response to a given opening phrase, and this is a portion of your melody writing question. If you're curious about the ARCT level, you end up writing the whole 16 bars in two voices in response to a given opening phrase. And now, please be sure to connect your own dots. It's important to not just do this at the table and hope that it sounds good. Analyze counterpoint, hear counterpoint, and play counterpoint. Then you'll be ready to write counterpoint.